Today I want to go over probably the quickest video I've ever going to make, but this is going to be a real easy one. How to tell if your 2-cycle engine is good or bad or blown. Very first thing you're going to want to do, and I would usually do these in order. Pull the pull cord. Does it have any compression at all? No. You're probably pretty close to having a blown engine. Now, sometimes you'll feel compression, but it still isn't starting. If that's the case, I take out the spark plug and I literally pull the pull cord to see if I see any movement. And if you do see movement, then at least you know your piston's going up and down. Now, something to take note, for instance, this one, I literally see a piece missing from the top of the cylinder. So obviously that's bad. 95% of the time you're not going to see that though. But from this one, I was able to basically say, that's it, this engine's junk, and move forward. The only other way to really see anything super obvious is sometimes if you look in there, you can see the piston walls. If you see just giant score marks, then you've already determined that already, and yeah, it's not going to be a good outcome for the engine. I'll just put it that way. Now, assuming that you're part of the other 95%, next thing you're going to want to do is take off the muffler. The muffler, let me explain why the muffler is important. Especially in chainsaws, but you know, this is basically a different version of a chainsaw. But weed eaters, hedge trimmers, all those, people love nothing more than when they first turn it on to just rev them up. Full throttle all the way, no load, full throttle, blue smoke coming out everywhere. It's a pastime, I swear. So, knowing that, what ends up happening is you will heat up the edge of the piston and the port and the rings on the exhaust side, but the intake is going to be nice and cool because it's getting nice, cool, fresh gas every time it goes up and down. So it's going to be cooler over there, and you're not going to really have too much of a problem on that side. The problem is when you heat up an area so rapidly. These are not the same metals. They will expand and contract very differently. Now, under normal conditions, they will expand more or less the same, or at least within a tolerable amount. That's how engines work. But when you rev it up and you heat it up very, very, very quickly, especially under a load too, like the worst thing in the world to do is when you first start this up, start cutting like in 2 seconds with your finger all the way down. Don't do that. Chainsaw, same thing. Let it run for like a minute at least, and then when you do start running it, let it go for like quarter throttle. Just don't push it. Get it nice and evenly warmed up. Having said all that, I know I said this is going to be brief. I might have lied, but having said all that, the reason why you check there is you're looking for scoring. Now, I don't have scoring on this one. Well, I might, but it's really obvious when you take off the exhaust. You'll see the actual piston itself. You just look to see if it's smooth and nice, like it should be, or rigid and scraped up, like a 5-year-old's knee. So you're going to want to look at that. This next one, it's going to be different for every machine, so I'm not going to open up a carburetor. But the other part is if everything seems to be fine, if everything seems to be in line, you're going to want to look down the throat of the carburetor, and sometimes you can see the piston. Sometimes you would have to open up the throttles, of course, and the choke and all that. You know, they can have a pretty small opening, so you might not be able to do that. If you can't, then you have to take the carburetor off and do the exact same thing that you did for the exhaust, because more likely, if it's not anything on this side, you're running straight fuel or fuel without enough lubrication, so maybe just not enough oil, and you're going to cause a problem. So you have that to look forward to as well. Unfortunately, this next part's going to require a substantial amount of work, but you're going to want to look at the piston. Now, this is obviously a clean new piston, but yours is going to look a whole lot darker than this. And I just put the ring on. In fact, I put it upside down. But what you can tell though is, you see how the ring moves freely? Like, you see the gap here? I can move the gap. That's how piston rings are supposed to move when they're not under compression. If you take the top of the engine off, the cylinder off the engine, and you're just looking at the piston and the rod and everything, and you see that your piston rings do not expand back out, you either have an exceptionally worn pair of piston rings, or if you look at them, sometimes you're going to find deposits kind of just keeping it stuck in there. And if that's the case, then that deposit can actually cause there to be low compression and you're not going to run. Really, you could clean it. You run the risk of breaking the rings. These are very hard but very brittle at the same time. So I've had pretty good luck with soaking it in acetone or gasoline, just straight gasoline, for a very long time. Usually at least a couple days, and then over time I'll go over there with like a pick and just very, very gently try to move the ring. I don't try to take it off. What I end up trying to do is I try to twist it a little bit, and if that's not going to happen, then I try to at least pull out one side, because once one side gets pulled out, the other one usually doesn't want to come out. But over the course of you continuing to try to do this, it will usually come free eventually. Now, if you are successful on this, then you're going to want to take it off, clean it very good, clean out the little grooves that the rings sits in very, very well. That could be a chore by itself because you don't want to scrape anything. Carb cleaner sometimes is really good. The problem with that is some carb cleaners, especially like the ones that you get for like the, not the dipping, but the ones that come like in a paint can, just like the one that soaks, that has a little basket, that can, if you leave it in there too long, can cause problems, so don't do that. But you know, you could put a little in there and let it sit there for a little bit and get it at least get it like softened up. And with a very, very soft bristle brush, we're talking like a plastic bristle or something, then you can then try to get as much of it out as you can. I think I used a torch tip cleaner one time, a very, very slow process, and because I didn't want to damage anything, but it did work. So yeah. Now, if you don't see any buildup, just look at the general piston and see if it's okay. Last but not least, if you don't see any of this part is going to be a little difficult. You can measure the actual cylinder wall. See, go online, get your tolerances, get your what it should be, and perhaps it's just super worn and you are in the market for a new cylinder and most likely piston. Every engine's going to be a little different, so look at your engine. If it says it should be no more than like 52 millimeters, then make sure it's no more than 52 millimeters. If it's 52 and 52.4, that 0.4 could do a lot of leaking. Something else to kind of think about with a worn piston, usually the skirt right here, it wouldn't be very dirty. It will be a little dirty, but not very dirty. If you are having excess blow-by because of a worn piston or wall, it's going to be darkened. You'll see a lot of soot. You'll see a lot of just discoloration. So if you see that, it's a pretty telltale sign that your piston's worn. Now, you could probably just put new rings and call it good. Perhaps they make a larger set of rings for your application. Who knows? That's completely different for your engine. The point of it is these are the ways you can tell if your 2-cycle is having just not a good engine anymore, or if you should be going down a different avenue. If you assume it's a compression issue, that's the reason why. If you follow these steps, you can usually tell if your engine's good or bad. No matter what, if you do determine that you have a bad engine, bad piston, bad cylinder, everything, the only thing to do is replace it. Don't try to repair it. Now, when I say repair, I mean usually the cylinder. The piston, those are almost always very, very inexpensive, and in comparison, sometimes they can be a few hundred, but in comparison to a whole new motor, it's a whole lot cheaper. But when we're talking like the cylinder walls are scored and everything, you'll see videos online showing you can sand it, you can maybe get it milled. There's a whole bunch of ways everyone assumes or say that it actually will work, and it will. It will work for a short period of time. This is the reason why it's a short period of time. There is a coating, nickel silk coating on these usually, and that coating makes the wall very durable. And when you sand that coating away, you are basically just lessening the life of your engine. But it will work. Maybe if you sand it and you put new rings in there, a new piston, it will run like a champ for 10 years. You never know. It could run for 10 minutes. You also don't know that either. It just depends on how much you had to sand, how deep the scratches were, what was going on. The whole picture has to be considered. But based on my experience, especially if it's not your own machine, do not try to repair a cylinder wall. Just replace it. It's not worth it. You'll get away with it a couple times probably, but you will find that one that decided to fail, and then you kind of look like you don't know what you're doing. So don't do that. If your engine is bad, just replace it. Replace the whole machine if you need to, repair it, whatever you want to do. But if you follow these steps, you should be able to determine if your engine is good or bad, or if you're looking down the wrong avenue and you should be looking elsewhere for the fix. I'm not going to go over the other fixes obviously, but this is just how to tell if your engine is good or bad, and if it is bad, what the possible ways of repairing it are. I'll just go over those one more time. If it's just the piston, very rare. Usually if it's just worn, if you measure the cylinder, you can usually just get a new piston and rings and put it in there, no problem. If it's anything to do with the bore, anything to do with the cylinder, anything to do with the walls, don't even bother. Just replace the whole thing, including the piston and rings. If it's just a buildup, try to clean it, and if you cannot clean it, buy a new set. In fact, it'd probably be a good idea to buy a new set of rings at the very minimum, preferably a whole new piston, because more likely than not you will scratch something. And yeah, this is a real brief overview. I mean, there's other things obviously, but this will go over about 98% of all compression related issues for 2-strokes, and even 4. A lot of this is good for 4, not necessarily the ports of course, but if you were to take it off and take a look at it, you can see more or less the exact same thing in general. Okay, well, I said I'll make this short, so I'll go ahead and make this even shorter. I'll catch you in the next video. Have a good night. Definitely subscribe. Later.